I want to talk very quickly on this Communion Sunday from the subject that is even before you right now, from the text that has been provided. I want to talk from the subject, fault line of the mind. Fault line of the mind. In August of 2014, a situation emerged where a young man named Michael Brown was killed in Ferguson, Missouri. This uprising took place, and as an uprising took place surrounding the death of Michael Brown, my first son in the ministry, F. Willis Johnson, was pastoring the Wellspring Church and called for me to come down to help and to assist his church as they dealt with the violence that emerged, that they dealt with the tension of that terrible situation, the death of Michael Brown at the hand of a policeman. The police shot him and left him to die on the street in Ferguson, Missouri, hours after he had been shot. What a heinous act. But as I went down to Ferguson, Missouri, right outside of St. Louis, Missouri, to help F. Willis Johnson, I went with righteous indignation because this is a narrative that has been played out in our community far too much. Most recently, because of video camera, we have seen these atrocities that have historically taken place. As I went down there, I went down and wound up with a bullhorn, leading a group of people down the street with that bullhorn that eventually confronted a line of militaristic police that, as I sat down with two women on that tarmac, on that street, while others bounced around and opposed that opposition, those policemen that, like a military brigade, had assembled on line in front of us, sat down for over an hour in that sun to protest the killing of Michael Brown, but the historic killing of our people. There was a article, there was a organization called Al Jazeera that did a video on that day, and they showed as we lined up, and they showed the tension, and they put a tag on the video that they created. They put the tag fault line. They put the tag fault line on the video that showed as machine guns were pointed at the three of us as we sat in the street. They put a tag fault line as that day they pulled literally dogs out that they might be brought by in a truck and bark at us. And they lined up with homicide seemingly in their minds. They put a tag on that called fault line. And I didn't mind serving in that capacity. I didn't mind what happened that day because I knew how serious that situation was. Well, as serious as that situation was in 2014, yes, I deem and determine that what is taking place around the United States right now is just as dangerous, if not more. And it is the fault line of the mind. There is an anti-critical race theory movement that has state legislatures all around the country trying to enact legislation that will, in essence, whitewash history. They are trying to advance anti-critical race theory legislation that says that we cannot tell the truth about where we have come as a country. And as the songwriter said, over a way that with tears has been watered, shedding our blood in the path of the slaughtered. We have come through some treacherous times. We've come through some painful moments. And it's necessary for us to be able to teach our children not just about the pain and the problems of the past, but we also have to be freed to teach our children the greatness of their past. We have to be able to teach our children that they have come from greatness. And look, that's why I wanted to look at this text on today, because it appears that there's nothing new under the sun. It appears that as we are dealing with state legislatures all over this country, and even in the state of Indiana, that are trying to, put teachers under surveillance and have their lesson plans approved beforehand. They are trying to ensure that we cannot talk about race, and we cannot talk about the problems of the past. We cannot talk about these things. The problem with that is that when you don't talk about your past, the old adage says that we are destined to repeat it. And unfortunately, that's this type of regressive legislation that wants to send us back and place us on contemporary auction blocks and sell black and brown people into a system of modern day slavery. Why? Because there's an incarceration that is taking place through this legislation. It will take place, and it will be the incarceration of the mind. The fault line is the mind. That's how we look at in this text. King Nebuchadnezzar sought to assimilate the children of Israel. That this is how he sought to assimilate them. If you look at Daniel, the first chapter, if you look at what they sought to do to them, if you look at verse 4, it tells you that they pulled together, a leadership training program down in Babylon. And when they pulled together this leadership training program, they pulled those that were talented. They pulled those that were, it says, handsome and aptitude for learning and well-informed. They were quick to understand. They pulled together these that were qualified to serve in this plan for assimilation. But understand my application. Understand the implications on today. Understand that this ancient text, speaks to what's going on right now. What's going on in this text is that they pulled them together, and they said, we want to pull them together. And this is what we want to do. We want to teach them the language and the literature of the Babylonians. In other words, the first way to assimilate the children of Israel into the land of Babylon was to manipulate their minds. And really, this was to get them to forget where they had come from. This was to get them to forget how they had been marched through a Middle Passage experience, east, northeast from Jerusalem. And now they were in the land of Babylon, and they were held captive, enslaved in this land. And as they were enslaved in the land of Babylon, they wanted them to forget where they had come from, because that was the first tool for assimilation. And don't look now, but in 2022, it's the same playbook that has been pulled out again. The same playbook that you find from antiquity is the same playbook that is being used right now to get our children to learn the language and the literature only of the oppressor. And what we have to understand is that this is nothing new. And what we need to understand, that this is just as dangerous, if not more, than physical incarceration. Because if you take somebody's mind, if you take our children and make them think that the playing field is level, if you make them think that there have never been any atrocities within history, if you make them think that the things that are taking place right now, don't have anything to do with race, then what you are doing is that you are whitewashing the brains of young people that need to understand where they come from. Understand that this is deliberate. Back in the day, I'm talking about Nebuchadnezzar. Nebuchadnezzar decided that what he was going to do was he was going to take the young people and he was going to make them forget where they had come from. And he was going to encourage them to learn more about Babylon. Babylon is still known as the fountainhead for evil. These Babylonians, they had a society where they worshiped themselves and they worshiped their own culture. They were a people that were given to an incestuous lifestyle, and they were people that were just ignorant, and they wanted then the children of Israel to learn to appreciate their history and learn to appreciate how great they were, so that in learning about them, they would forget how great they are. Oh, that's dangerous, my mothers and fathers, my brothers and my sisters. It's dangerous in a time when we have such cultural polarity, in a time when we have cultures that are at odds with one another because of that which has been contrived, not just by one man, but by an ideology that understands that the country is getting darker by the day, and they want to hold on to their dominance. Yes, in a situation like that, the first thing we see them doing that mirrors and mimics what took place is they look at them and they say, we're going to only allow them to learn of the language and the literature of the dominant society. And so that's dangerous, my mothers and fathers, my brothers and my sisters. This is the fault line of the mind. And I'm not going to hold you long on today because, unfortunately, this is a sermon we've been hearing down through the years. But I do want to let you know that it's possible for us to fight even on this fault line. It's possible for us to continue to allow our children to know of their greatness. We have to make sure that our children not just learn of somebody else's history, but we have to make sure our children learn of their history. In fact, we have to make sure that every child learns to appreciate everybody's history and everybody's culture if we are going to train up the global leaders that we are going to need to have if we are going to be what God has called us to be. Yes, we need to make sure that we fight on this fault line. Well, how do you fight on this fault line? Well, first of all, you have to make sure you recognize the game. This is what happened with Daniel and Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. You understand that the king decided that what he would do was he would bring them into this program, and he would try to teach them how to forget where they had come from and how to forget their history and encourage them to learn his. Yes, but everybody was not oblivious. Everybody did not allow for this dissemination of untruth, for these lies about the homogeneous nature of culture to emerge. And Daniel was one that we find in verse 8 that says, no, yes, I am not going to bow down. I am not going to drink the wine. I'm not going to eat the bread. Oh, it's a dangerous thing to eat from the table of the king. It's a dangerous thing. Yes, but what does Daniel say? Daniel says, I am not going to drink the Kool-Aid. Oh, too many people and too many times drink the Kool-Aid. But you need to recognize the game. You need to understand, yes, that this is the same game that is played over and over again. Somebody asked me the other day, we were in a meeting. At the end of the meeting, they sent me a text message. They said, well, it's not easy dealing with folk when you're trying to negotiate and when you're trying to provide moral suasion, as Frederick Douglass did during that time of abolition. It's not easy when you're trying to convince people that don't look like you and don't think like you and don't have your same concern and urgency and certainly don't have the same righteous indignation, but you're still trying to convince them to do the right thing. How do you keep so calm in the midst of some of those Zoom meetings we sit on with you? And what I told them is that I can keep my calm because I don't expect that the oppressor is going to be active, yes, and support my liberation. That is not my expectation. Yes, I'm not crazy because, insanity is doing the same thing over and over again and expecting to get a different result. I don't expect to get a different result. It would be nice to get a different result. I have hope that we get a different result, but I have no expectation that the oppressor is going to be a part of my liberation. Yes, and so what I have to determine is that I have to go ahead and do what I need to do to ensure that our children learn how great they are and they understand that it is not simply about simply about somebody else's history, but there's greatness in their history as well. Yes, we don't have the expectation. Yes, we don't have the expectation that power will concede anything, because power concedes nothing without demand. We need to learn how to recognize the game. And look, don't let this be light and mirror show. Don't be fooled into thinking that this is not as dangerous as it is. Don't be fooled into thinking that this is a way for us to move to some type of utopia when race and culture have been a source of division, and race has put certain people at the bottom of the economic, round at the bottom, yes, and others at the top. When the rich seem to get richer and the poor get poorer, there's the same thing that takes place in this text, that not only did they teach them the language and the literature, but you keep on reading and you find that they changed their names. They changed their names. And so the problem is that everybody's name has been changed to Robert or Mark Smith, yes, but there's some people named Smith that have a legacy, and they have wealth, and they have privilege because their name's Smith. But if you change somebody else's name to Smith, they don't have the same privilege that those other Smiths have. It's a dangerous thing. You have to recognize the game. But not only do you have to recognize the game, you have to stand with resolve. Look at verse 8. That's what Daniel did. Daniel said, I am not going to drink the Kool-Aid. He said, I am not going to eat the crumbs that fall from the master's table. I am not going to fall into this trap of assimilation. Daniel says that what I'm going to do is I am going to show some resolve. And my brothers and my fathers, my brothers and my sisters, we need to show some resolve right now. We need to show some resolve that says that I'm not just going to react when I hear about it, but I'm going to respond. I told somebody the other day, in fact, I'll tell you who it was. It was the superintendent, of Center Grove schools. And you do know that last month, at the end of last year, there was a blackface incident south of Indianapolis, but still in the greater Indianapolis area. And when I called on behalf of the NAACP to set up a meeting of accountability with the superintendent of the Center Grove schools, understanding that the Center Grove schools and the system that does not have cultural competency that is required by the state at the top of their agenda produces students that would be on a bus on the way from a championship game that they won, and have a student that puts blackface on and puts tattoo marks on, like the black student that they just played against from Westfield, north of town. When you have situations like that, that is not just an individual situation. There's a systemic problem that needs to be dealt with. And so when I called him to set up the meeting, I said, well, yes, this did happen at the end, of 2021. But here we are in the beginning of 2022, because, there was a reaction that took place to this incident at the end of last year. But in the beginning of this year, there's some people that are concerned that are responding right now. And sir, you have to respond as well, because there's a difference between reacting and responding. And I want to encourage everybody that gets this message by the end, that understands how terrible it is and how heinous it is, and how, terribly, arrogant it is to say that our children cannot learn where they've come from and learn about the history that we all have lived. If you understand it, I don't want you just to react and have a reaction right now, even though it would be nice for you to say, I understand in the comment or the chat category right now. I don't want you to just react to it. I want you to respond to it. And I want you to find every person you can in the state of Indiana. I want you to find every person you can and call them and tell them to call their state senator and call now their representative and let them know that House Bill 1134 is a heinous and racist bill that cannot go forward because it is only taking us back when we need to go forward. Call them right now because we need to have Christians that stand up. We need to respond just as we react, and we need to respond with some righteous indignation. Does anybody know what I'm talking about when I say we need to respond with some righteous indignation? If I am to appropriate the word of God I read, it lets me know that the prophet of old stood for those and fought for those that could not easily fight for themselves. And if I read the New Testament, it tells me about a Jesus that came, and in Luke 4:18, it lets us know that he came that there might be liberation for those that are oppressed. And if this is the Jesus that we serve, then by God, we ought to show some resolve and be Christ-like and stand up right now and let this world know that there are some people that do not believe that there is anything good that can come out of the notion that we need to just forget where we have come from. Because if we forget where we have come from, then we're destined to repeat some of the things that we have gone through. We have to have some resolve that says that I am going to stand up with righteous indignation. And I believe that I understand correctly when I look at the word of God. God stands on the side of right. God stands on the side of those that are oppressed. God stands on the side of those that go through the pains and the problems of this world, but still lean toward him in time of trial and time of tribulation. And that's what gives us what we need to stand with some righteous indignation. We have to stand with some resolve that says that I can look back over the ways that with tears have been watered. I can look back and I can see how our people have bled and died so that we have a right to vote. And we have bled and died so that we have a right to move past this educational apartheid within this nation that would seek to tell us that we are so much different that we can't find the common ground that keeps us together. Yes, we need to stand with some resolve and say, the God I serve is not pleased. In fact, 1134 and every other anti-cultural law, every other anti-CRT, every other anti-critical race theory law that is being supported and pushed in what seems like 26, more than half of the states in the United States of America. Somebody needs to stand with some resolve. I read the headline even last night, and it let me know that the state legislators in the state of Mississippi, they walked out before they took a vote on this critical race theory opposition. They walked out and they said that we might not have the majority, but we're going to stand up and we are going to be the vocal minority. They walked out because they stood with some resolve. And by God, that's what needs to happen here. And that's what needs to happen around the country. We need to stand up right now because we understand that this is the fault line of the mind. And we need to free our minds right now so that we can move forward. We need to free our mind right now and grab a hold of the responsibility that comes to us to stand with resolve. Oh, I'm trying to press my way today. First of all, you have to recognize game. Yes, but then you have to stand with resolve. But the final thing I see here today is you have to remember your greatness. Remember your greatness. I'm still in this text today. Yes, you understand that the reason Daniel was able to stand was because he did not forget where he came from. The reason he was able to understand, yes, his responsibility to revolt or to rebel or show resolve and to stand against that which sought to bring him and his people down. The reason he was able to understand his responsibility was because he was able to remember his greatness. Understand, this is a move at assimilation that was trying to get him to forget where he had come from. And in forgetting where he had come from, they thought that he would also forget his greatness. And look, when I look at this, I want you to understand that I am not simply suggesting that you understand your historic greatness, even though you are great. We need to teach our children that we come from greatness. We need to teach our children that it was our people that laid the foundation for math and science and literature and philosophy way back when. Back in ancient Egypt or in ancient Kemet. We have to teach our children that it was our people that took 1-ton bricks, and without mortar and without a crane, they built pyramids that were 500 feet tall. They need to understand that they've come from greatness. They need to understand that when they went over to Africa, to West Africa, to get our people and put them on those ships and bring them over to America and Central America and South America, they didn't go over there to get the dumb ones. They didn't go over there to get those. Just like in this text, they went to get the best and the brightest and the strongest. When they went to West Africa, they didn't go and get slaves. They went over there and they got those that were political leaders and those that were community builders. They went over there. They got the best and the brightest and the strongest. And those are the ones that made their way to America. And so, no, we are not slaves. We are great African kings and queens. We need to understand our greatness. But Naim Akbar says that we don't have to understand our greatness just because we're great. Naim Akbar says that we have to understand our African greatness, and we also have to understand the horrors of slavery, not so that we can cry still tears for past injustices, but so that we can understand why and where the lights were turned out on our yesterday. It's time for us to turn on the light right now. It's time for us to be woke right now. It's time for us to stand up right now. And it's time for us not just to remember the greatness of our past, but it's time for us to remember the greatness of our God. God has sustained us. God has allowed us to make it over these ways with tears and over the blood, and through the dogs that were snipping at us and through everything that has sought to take us down. It has been the greatness of God. Come here, let me go back to this text to help me, Lord, get out of this sermon on today. You need to understand your greatness. Look, this is what happened. Daniel understood his greatness, so he didn't go for it. He didn't drink the Kool-Aid. Daniel understood his greatness. But not only do we see Daniel in this text, but we also see Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. You know these three Hebrew boys. They stood with some resolve as well. Nebuchadnezzar in chapter 3 decides that when they don't bow down before the icon of the Babylonian culture, when they don't bow down before this idol of the culture, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego decide that, they're going to continue to stand with resolve, even though they've been threatened to be thrown in the fiery furnace. They were threatened by Nebuchadnezzar. Nebuchadnezzar said, if you don't bow down before this culture, if you don't assimilate yourself, if you don't do what I'm telling you to do, if you don't just accept it, then what you are going to do is you're going to get thrown in the fiery furnace. But they stood with resolve and they said, King, O King, our God is able to deliver us. But if not, we are still not going to bow down before you. And we have to stand up and understand exactly what happened for Daniel is the same thing that happened for Shadrach and Meshach and Abednego. And it's the same thing that will happen for those that dare to stand with righteous indignation, for those that stand to remember our God, because Daniel wound up in the lion's den, but God went by the lion's den and gave that lion lockjaw. He was in a lion's den with some hungry lions, but they did not eat him. Why? Because God stood up in the midst of their protest. Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, when they were thrown into the fiery furnace, they tell me Nebuchadnezzar heated up the furnace 7 times hotter than it normally was. It was so hot that the soldiers that took Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, to the fiery furnace, the ones that put them in the furnace, they fell out dead. What the old adage says, when you dig one ditch, you better dig two, because the ditch you dig for me, it might wind up being for you. These soldiers, they fell out dead from the heat, but Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, they were somehow able to survive. Let me see what the text says. The text says, that when they were in the fiery furnace, same thing with Daniel, God showed up. Says that Nebuchadnezzar, he looked through the door of the fiery furnace and he said, hold on, I put three of them in there. There was Shadrach and Meshach and Abednego. I put three in there, but Nebuchadnezzar king looked in there and said, somehow, they're able to make it even in the midst of this fire. But it's crazy because I'm looking in there, and where I put three in there, now I see four. And Nebuchadnezzar had a little conversion moment. He said, the last one, he kind of walks like, he kind of talks like, he kind of puts you in the mindset of, somebody say the Son of God. Is there somebody right now that knows that if you stand for what's right, if you stand with some righteous indignation, if you stand that God will be the wind beneath your wings? Is there somebody that knows that God will show up? I don't know how you feel about it, but I thank God that God is that type of God, that he'll show up. He's the type of God that will show up in the midst of your trouble. Don't forget that these were the children of Israel. The children of Israel had been herded together and marched mile after endless mile through a Middle Passage experience. And here they are. They wind up along the banks of the Tigris and Euphrates River, modern day Babylon, modern day Iraq. They wind up there. And when they wind up there, the oppressor said, well, what I want you to do is I want you to sing a song. And they asked themselves, by the rivers of Babylon. The psalmist says, there we wept when we remembered Zion. We hanged our harps on the willows in the midst thereof. For there they that carried us away required of us a song. Our tormentors required of us a mirth, saying, sing unto us one of those songs of Zion. To which they cried out, how can we sing the Lord's song in a strange land? They remembered the Lord's song. Understand that they did not sing the song of the oppressed, nor did they sing the song of the oppressor, but they sung the Lord's song. And that's what we have to keep on doing. We have to keep on standing up, being the mouthpiece of God. We have to stand up and sing the Lord's song, because the Lord's song is one that says that one day, if we keep on opening up our voices, if we keep on opening up our mouths, then one day justice will roll down like water. It's a song that says that righteousness will flow like a mighty stream. It's a word that says that God will be with us and God will be for us. He'll be the wind beneath our wings. He'll provide us with the strategy. He'll provide us with the encouragement. He'll provide us with everything we need. And it might not seem like we can make it, but the word I read lets me know that the God I serve, he specializes in the impossible. The God I serve, he's able to take a giant and he's able to make the giant die. He's able to take a supermajority and he's able to send two spies into the promised land that come back with a minority report. The God I serve is able to move in the midst of whatever the circumstance and whatever the situation. And somebody ought to put your hand up right now. Somebody ought to say in chat right now that he's able, but don't just put it in chat. You need to chat to your neighbors and you need to chat to your friends. You need to text somebody. You need to send out an email. You need to find a way to protest. Our children's minds are on the line. Fight on the fault line of the mind, realizing today that we have a responsibility to fight for the right and to fight for the truth and to fight to ensure that everybody has a chance to learn of their greatness and everybody has a chance to learn of everybody else's greatness, so that we can be on a level playing field, all equal at the foot of the cross. We have to make sure we're doing what we need to do. We have to recognize the game. We have to stand with resolve. We have to remember our greatness.
Law enforcement.
No justice, no peace. No justice, no peace. No justice, no peace.
This is the area Ferguson's residents are calling Ground Zero, the epicenter of the protests. When we arrived, it was the fourth day in a row that people were marching along this street, just a few blocks from where Michael Brown was shot.
Look, this is what I want you to do. We need you to give First Baptist Church North Indianapolis. We need for you to give. We have started another year, another fiscal year, but we need to make sure we are paying our tithes and giving our offerings, providing donations and contributions, even if you are not a member of First Baptist Church North Indianapolis. If you can get down with what we are doing at First Baptist Church North Indianapolis, if you can understand and appreciate means to increase in value. So if you appreciate the ministries of First Baptist Church North Indianapolis, we're going to ask that you sow a seed. We're going to ask that you go right now to our website, pay by way of Givelify and PayPal or Zelle at firstbaptistnorth.org. You can even send by way of snail mail your contributions. Please don't mail cash, but send checks that we might ensure the ministries of First Baptist Church are supported, and we continue to do what God has called us to do. We need for you to do that right now in the name of Jesus Christ. And look, I said to a man that stood at the gate of the year, "Give me a light that I might tread safely into the unknown." The man responded, "Put your hand in the hand of God. That will be better to you than a light and safer than a known way." So I go on not knowing. I would not if I might, but I'd rather walk with God in the darkness than to walk alone in the light. I'd rather walk with God by faith than walk alone by sight. Now may the grace and peace of God the Father, God the Son, and God the blessed Holy Spirit rest, rule, and abide with each of you, henceforth now, even forevermore. Let us all say, amen.